All right, good morning, everybody. I will call this hearing to order. I am Commission President James Brown. I will be the presiding officer for this hearing. With me today in person in the Bollinger Room are Vice President Jennifer Fielder and Commissioner Annie Bukacek. We have Commissioner O'Donnell online, and I do expect Commissioner Pinocci to join us. Staff Attorney Dan Palco will be advising the commission. Dan is sitting to my left. Commission staff are also present in the room today, and the hearing is being transcribed by a court reporter with Lazowski Court Reporting. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. For the record, the time is now 9:02 a.m. The date is Monday, September 11, 2023. The commission and its staff are appearing from Helena, Montana, as I noted in the Bollinger Room of the Montana Public Service Commission. And this is the scheduled public hearing at docket number 2021.12.136 concerning the commission's investigation into the adequacy of legacy infrastructure operated by Quest Corporation doing business as CenturyLink QC. Before I take appearances, I would just like to obviously recognize the solemn date that is, of course, 9/11 was the date that some 3,000 persons lost their lives to a terrorist attack here in the United States. And I think it's appropriate if we take a few seconds to think about those souls and the losses. All right, thank you, everybody. All right, I will now take appearances of counsel. Please introduce yourself and who you will represent. We'll start with CenturyLink.
Morning, President Brown, members of the commission. Peter Scott, representing CenturyLink in this hearing.
Good morning, Mr. Scott. For MCC.
Good morning, President Brown, members of the commission. Jamie Pollard, representing the Montana Consumer Council.
Good morning, Mr. Pollard. All right, I would just note for the record that recesses will occur at convenient times during the hearing. In order to comply with our obligations under the Montana Constitution to provide the right of the people to participate in their government proceedings. I will ask if there is anybody in the room that would like to make public comment this morning. Anybody in the room that would like to make public comment this morning? Seeing nobody. Mr. English, is there anybody online that would like to make public comment? I'm being told there isn't. All right, so no public comment this morning. All right. For those that would like to make written comments on this matter, you are free to do so. You can submit written comment by emailing your comments to the Commission's Ready website or email them to pschelp@mt.gov, pschelp@mt.gov. All right. Are there any informal questions from the parties before we begin the evidentiary portion of this hearing? Any initial matters, Mr. Scott?
Nothing on behalf of CenturyLink.
Nothing on behalf of the MCC.
Okay. All right. Seeing none, we'll now move to the evidentiary hearing. I am aware that there is an outstanding motion for amended protective order that has been filed by CenturyLink, which was filed on August 24, 2023. I'm prepared to rule on that matter without taking argument on it. In its motion, CenturyLink requested protection of information contained in CenturyLink supplemental responses to data requests PSC 001 sub D, PSC 002 sub B, and 002 sub D, PSC-0013 sub B, and PSC 14. Supplemental responses include information regarding trouble reports, customer locations, access lines, and the West Glacier OSP map. In the stock, the commission has granted CenturyLink two protective orders, Protective Order 7825 small b and Protective Order 7825 small f. In these two protective orders, the commission granted protection of all the types of information contained in supplemental responses to data requests PSC 001 small d, PSC 002 small b, and PSC 002 small d, PSC 0013 small b, and PSC 014. Seeing as the information in supplemental responses to data request PSC 001 small d, PSC 002 small b, and small d. Are you keeping up? PSC 0013 small b and PSC 014 is already protected by protective orders 7825 small b and 7825 small f. The commission considers the motion for amended protective orders filed by CenturyLink on August 24th, 2023 to be moot. The information contained in CenturyLink supplemental responses to data requests PSC 001 small d, PSC 002 small b, and 002 small d, PSC 0013 small b, and PSC 014 is considered confidential information and shall be treated as such during the hearing. I would ask both counsel, by the way, because there is some sensitive information and confidential information contained in this docket. I would ask counsel to affirmatively notify me as the commission chair if you believe any of the questioning was bleeding into that confidential information.
We'll do so, Mr. President. We've conferred and neither of us believes that will be the case, but if something comes up, we'll certainly alert you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the help in that regard. Based on the parties' pre-hearing memos, there are a few items we should address. First, we have a request to allow Dr. Robert E. Loeb. That's easy. To testify remotely via Zoom. I understand that this request is unopposed. Mr. Scott, is that correct?
CenturyLink does not oppose that.
All right, that request is hereby granted then. Next, let's address the admission of data requests and responses. The parties have filed pre-hearing memos identifying requests and responses they propose to admit into evidence. I believe MCC's pre-hearing memo was the most expansive because it proposed to admit all data requests and responses that have been filed in this matter. Mr. Pollard, since your pre-hearing memo contained broadest request for admission of data requests and responses, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, we would like to move for all data requests to be entered into the record.
And responses too, I presume?
Yes, Commissioner.
All right, Mr. Scott, any objection to that?
No objection, Your Honor. I would, I guess, supplement that with, we also included a number of supplemental items in our pre-hearing memo. And I just want to clarify whether the motion covers those documents as well.
My understanding, Mr. Pollard, do you want to clarify?
That would be my understanding as well.
All right.
Thank you. No objection at all.
Okay. All right, then all data requests and responses are admitted. As I noted, there are a significant number of confidential materials in this docket. If the parties wish to question the witnesses about confidential materials, again, please notify me so that we can transition into a closed session. And I request the parties try to group the questions related to confidential materials together so the commission can limit the number of closed sessions in order to speed up this proceeding. All right. Are there any other formal pre-hearing matters such as requests for accommodating witnesses, stipulation, evidentiary motions?
Sorry, Mr. President. There was one additional document that we thought would be helpful to seek admission of that's not included in the pre-hearing memo, and that was the notice of funding opportunity that was prepared by NTIA. It's referenced in testimony from both parties' witnesses, and I thought it would be advantageous to make sure that the record includes that document.
Mr. Pollard?
I would not oppose that.
All right. All right. Did you want to mark that?
I will, if that's convenient, Mr.
Yes, please.
As soon as I find a sticker.
All right. Upward. Do you have a sticker?
Permission to approach the.
Yes, of course. All right, Mr. Scott, what have you marked that as?
It's marked, Mr. President, as exhibit CTL-001.
And my understanding, there's no objection to this document, so CTL 001 is admitted. All right, let's proceed to opening statements. Would CenturyLink like to make an opening statement, Mr. Scott?
Very briefly, Mr. President, members of the commission, CenturyLink, as you know, has been working on this issue for nearly a decade. And by that, I mean application of the service quality rule dealing with out of service repair times. That CTL or CenturyLink submitted a petition before this docket was opened. It was subsequently consolidated with this docket. It is number 2021.12.137. And we, of course, are pursuing that petition in our request that the commission grant a continuation of the temporary waiver to that rule that was granted, I believe, in 2014. And that's really the purpose of our participation, and we'll pursue that through the argument, presentation of evidence, and subsequent briefing in this matter. Thank you. That's all.
All right, Mr. Scott, Mr. Pollard, do you want to make your opening statement now or reserve?
I can make an opening statement now.
All right, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Service quality metrics such as the commission's out of service requirement rule that obligates CenturyLink to restore out of service infrastructure within 90%, we believe is still an important public policy for Montana's most rural consumers. We believe this is an important public policy because it ensures all Montanans, regardless of their location, are entitled to the same service quality as any of their urban counterparts. We believe that right now it's inappropriate to allow CenturyLink to discharge its obligations through a one-time subsidy when they have not offered any reasonable assurance as required in the notice that satellite service will be a reasonable and adequate alternative for these most rural customers. We also believe that given in the last docket a decade ago, CenturyLink's stipulation was tied to an application for federal funding through the CAF2 program. We would say that any additional waiver from the OOS requirement needs to be tied to federal funding to improve the antiquated infrastructure, which seems to be at the issue of many of these service quality issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pollard. Mr. Scott, you may proceed with your case in chief.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to call Al Lubbock as a witness. You have before you, I believe, Mr. Lubbock's pre-filed direct testimony. And I'm not sure where you have the witnesses positioned here.
All right, good morning, Mr. Lubbock. I'm going to swear you into this matter, and then Jamie is your witness here.
I believe our witness should be on Zoom.
Okay, I will swear both of you in then at the same time. So, all right, I would like both of our witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand, and I will swear you in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Please proceed.
Yeah, Mr. President, is procedural question. Is it typical in these hearings to have both parties' witnesses present during the questioning of the first witness?
Well, Mr. Scott, that's an excellent question. Based on my 2.5 years of being on the commission, I have never had an objection raised to having another party's witness listen to another party's witness. But if you're intending to object to that, I'd certainly entertain it.
I'm expressing curiosity about typical procedure. I think given the voluminous paperwork in this case and the parties' mutual understanding of the issues, I think I'll refrain from any objection. Just wanted to know procedurally what the commission has done with that in the past.
I appreciate that, Scott. It's my observation, understanding, because most of the testimony is pre-filed, that it's already been reviewed and anyway. So
No surprise.
Mr. President,
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just wanted to add that in my 6.5 years, I've not encountered anything like that also. Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Mr. Lubbock, could you please give your name and spell it for the court reporter in the record?
Yes, my name is Alan, Alan, Lubeck, Lubeck.
And Mr. Lubick, you're here on behalf of CenturyLink, is that correct?
That's correct.
And would you please let the commission know what your position with CenturyLink is?
I'm a public policy director, and I have responsibility for working with commission staffs in 7 states.
And how long have you been in that position, Mr. Lubbock?
I've been in that position since 2015, but not for the same states, different states along the way.
I see. And how long have you been in this position for Montana?
I was in the position for 2 years and then off of Montana for 2 years. And then now I've been back on since, I believe, the beginning of 2022.
And you prepared direct pre-filed testimony in this case?
Yes, I did.
And do you have a copy of that testimony in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you have as well the exhibits attached to that testimony?
I have most of them. I'm not sure I have them all.
Mr. Lubbock, are there any changes or corrections that you wish to make to your testimony before I tender you to cross-examination?
Yes, I have 3 corrections. On page 9, line 2, I'd like to delete the bracketed information. That was a mistake. And on lower on, and then further down on page 9.
Just a minute, Mr.
Oh,
Lubbock, let me clarify.
Yes.
You're talking about in bracket where it says, do we want to attach the email, correct?
Yes,
That's stricken.
yes.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
And then on the next question on the first line of the answer, CenturyLink had estimated 47%. The number should be 37%. The 47% includes both Quest and CenturyTel, and it should only be Quest.
I see. Is that reflected in your response to data request MCC 040?
Yes.
Thank you. Any others?
And then on page 10 on figure 1, on the left-hand figure, it says 47%. That should be 37% on the blue. And in the red, instead of 11.1%, it should be 21.1%. That's it.
That's it. Any questions from council?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lubbock, with those corrections made, is the testimony prepared here, your sworn statement and testimony in this case?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'd like to offer that testimony on behalf of CenturyLink, Mr. President.
All right, I presume you're going to label it 0002.
I will.
All right. Mr. Pollard, any objection to Mr. Lubeck's testimony as amended?
No objections.
All right, seeing no objection, CTL 0002 as amended is admitted.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I will tender the witness to MCC's counsel.
All right, Mr. Pollard, your witness.
Good morning, Mr. Lubeck. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to ask you a series of yes/no questions, and I will indicate to you if I want an explanation. Is that okay for you?
Yes,
Would you confirm that CenturyLink has not met the Commission's OOS clearance requirement for the last decade?
it has not.
Would you confirm that a waiver from the Commission's rule would apply to all of the Commission's customers in Montana, not just the 600 customers considered in this investigation?
That is correct.
Since the Commission granted the company's temporary waiver in 2015, has the company avoided OOS fines from the Montana Public Service Commission?
Yes.
What amount of money has the company avoided paying in fines since the 2015 waiver?
I have not calculated that.
Would you have kind of an exact of an estimate as possible?
I do not have an estimate. The only estimate that I could provide would be what was in the last, in 2014.
Thank you. Could the commission have issued an OOS fine against the company for the year 2022?
Yes, it could have.
Would you agree CenturyLink considered the commission's authority to assess potentially large fines under the OOS rule as a concern in this investigation, the 2014 investigation, and the 2019 rulemaking petition?
That was one of many concerns. Yes.
Do you agree that $900,000 is a large sum of money?
Yes.
Is the $900,000 subsidy proposed in this docket less than the amount of money CenturyLink would expect to incur in fines if the commission determined that the company was in violation of the OOS rule?
I don't know that.
In your testimony, you refer numerous times to the impact of competition on CenturyLink in Montana. Would you agree that the competition in the local voice telephone market began with the passage of the 1996 Telecommunications Act?
I believe that's when it escalated. Wireless was starting around that time as well.
Okay, thank you. And this is going to be a longer question, but would you accept, subject to check, that in the former U.S. West Service Territory in Montana, according to the Universal Service reports CenturyLink filed with the FCC, Montana's loops increased from 327,910 in 1996 to 363,764 in 2004.
I'm sorry, could you help me with that? Did you say loops?
Yes, sir, loops.
Not customers, but loops.
Yes, loops.
I don't know. Subject to check, that would seem reasonable.
Thank you. And so if you agree, subject to check, that would seem reasonable, would that also indicate that CenturyLink increased its number of customers in Montana during that initial period of deregulation?
Can't say that because a number of loops doesn't equate to the number of customers.
Okay. I'm now going to ask you two hypothetical questions regarding CenturyLink's out of service reporting. First, if one party calls another party and determines that person's line is constantly busy, when that caller asks her friend about the signal and the friend says the phone never rang, would CenturyLink report this as a trouble report?
Not unless the customer called CenturyLink.
So the customer has to call CenturyLink. The friend cannot report that the caller cannot report that their friend's phone is out of service on their behalf.
Oh, I'm sorry. The friend, actually, CenturyLink has policies on that, and I don't believe they can.
Okay.
That's to protect the customer and to protect the information on their account.
Just to clarify, you said that they cannot?
They cannot.
Okay, thank you.
Second, if there's a group of 4 houses and all 4 houses have no service, but only one customer is able to report the problem to CenturyLink, will CenturyLink count the problem as 1 trouble report or 4 trouble reports?
They would combine the 4, I believe, and count it as one trouble.
Thank
Since
you.
only one customer called in, it would be one trouble line would be counted, but they would repair as all four.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to direct you towards data response MCC 49. Do you have this in front of you?
I think, yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you confirm whether Wyoming is the only state in this list to provide the company with a waiver from an OOS-like metric in the last 5 years?
Yes, the in the last 5 years, that's correct.
Thank you. And I'm now going to push forward to data responses MCC 55, which also cross-references MCC PSC 004 subpart C.
Okay.
On the remaining locations where the company still provides services through an Anaconda carrier system, it listed in PSC for subpart C, Colorado, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Utah, and Wyoming. Is Nebraska the only state where CenturyLink has replaced copper wireline with fiber?
No, it wouldn't be the only state, but it's, Nebraska has a specific program to help do that. That the state pays for.
So regarding the answer in MCC 55, can you expand on which of those states in that list CenturyLink has replaced copper wireline with fiber in?
I don't have a specific list. I mentioned in here that Valentine Wire Center, which is just as rural as most Montana wire centers. And the Nebraska Commission gave CenturyLink a $15 million grant to build fiber to the prim to every household, unserved household.
Right. But you are unaware of where CenturyLink has updated in these other states outside of Nebraska.
I don't have the facts on that today.
Okay. I'm going to point you towards your direct testimony.
Okay.
Can you turn to page 12?
Yes.
Thank you. Here you assert all CenturyLink customers in Montana have access to at least 10 megabits per second over 1 megabyte per second wireline broadband. Does this statement depend on the availability of satellite service and the inclusion of satellite service in wireline service?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Now, I'm also going to, sorry to jump around, I'm also going to point you back to MCC 43.
Okay.
Does CenturyLink provide satellite services?
No, it does not.
Thank you. Would you agree that you relied on the FCC broadband map to answer the questions and noted that the FCC included satellite service in the federal agency's definition of fixed broadband?
Yes.
Do you know if your 100% statistic would change if satellite service were removed from the analysis?
Yes, it would change.
Would you agree, subject to check, that the current national broadband map no longer uses census blocks and instead indicates the percentage of locations where service is available?
At a statewide level?
Is there, so yes, at a statewide level, and if there's another level in which it would be analyzed, would you expand on that?
Well, the FCC now relies on the locations that are sent in by the providers, and they provide the GPS coordinates for each location. But as we move toward BEAD, they're looking at using census block groups to define whether or not service is provided.
Okay.
BEAD, it's an acronym, sorry.
Subject to check, would you also agree that if satellite service and only satellite service was removed from the FCC's definition of fixed broadband, that no county served by CenturyLink would show fixed broadband of at least 10 megabytes per second over 1 megabyte per second in 100% of the locations in the county?
I'm only going to object to the form of the question and ask that it be repeated.
Oh, okay, thank you. Would you agree that if satellite service was removed from the FCC's definition of fixed broadband, no county served by CenturyLink would show the necessary fixed broadband of 10 megabytes per second over 1 megabyte per second of 100%?
Subject to check. I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay, I'll try to make it a little bit more narrow. So subject to check, would you agree that WIBO would decrease from 100% of the locations served to 42% of the locations served if satellite service was removed from the definition?
I did review WIBO, and that is true.
Thank you. And then could you turn back to data response MCC 45? Am I mispronouncing the town? Weibo? Weibo. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I thought it was WIBO too, but then
It's Weibo. Sorry about that. Is the answer you provided in MCC 45 still correct?
in A or B? Well, both A and B are correct that CenturyLink does have middle mile, but it's copper.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you. And then to jump back around to your statement about the 10 megabytes per second over 1 megabyte per second, is it possible that VoIP, and VoIP is an acronym, services can be provided on copper-based landline telephone systems?
Yes, VoIP can be provided over the broadband portion of copper.
Thank you. So in your direct testimony, starting on page 15, as well as your responses to data request PSC 002, MCC 44, and MCC 50, the only location the company has provided actual cost analysis for is Weibo. Is this still correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you know the last time CenturyLink or its predecessor Quest met the commission's OOS clearance requirement for Weibo?
I do not.
Thank you. Can you return to CenturyLink's, can you please turn to CenturyLink's response in data request 21 subpart E?
MCC's data request?
PSC's,
PSC.
PSC's data request.
Okay.
Can you confirm that CenturyLink's ARPA application for Weibo was approved?
It was approved by the Broadband Commission, yes.
What was the amount of money that the Broadband Commission approved for Weibo?
I don't have that in front of me.
Was the project for FTTP?
Yes, it was for fiber to the premise.
Thank you. Would this project have upgraded any of the existing analog transmission facilities serving customers in the Weibo Wire Center?
To the extent that improving the middle mile, or well, if it would have improved middle mile, yes, but it would not have done fiber to the premise to any of those analog customers.
Okay. How many locations would this project have passed?
I don't have that in front of me either.
Okay.
I have it in my briefcase if you'd like me to.
Okay. Would you be able to confirm how many of those locations are current CenturyLink customers?
Of the number of in the analog customers, or the customers that are in the broadband program?
The customers that would have been the customers whose services would have been upgraded by the use of ARPA funding in Weibo.
Less than 20.
Okay. Did CenturyLink turn down the ARPA funding for Weibo?
Yes.
Thank you. Were the county commissioners who filed the 2021 complaint against CenturyLink in the Montana Public Service Commission aware your error was the reason the company did not accept ARPA funding for Weibo?
I did not speak to them. I don't know if anyone else spoke to those.
Thank you. I'm going to direct you to PSC 13 subpart B sheet 2. This relates to confidential information, but Mr. President, I do not plan to ask about any of the content of the confidential information.
Okay.
Is it correct to say that the response provides the street addresses for customers in columns J and K in sheet 2?
I believe that's the columns. It doesn't say in the response.
Would it also be correct to say that those street addresses can be entered into the FCC's national broadband map?
Yes.
Can you confirm entering those addresses will list the broadband providers available to those addresses?
I believe they would. I haven't spent much time on that broadband map.
Okay. Can you confirm this would also include the provider's broadband service speed available at those addresses?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information before this next question. Again, this is not going to go into the content of the confidential information in the sheet, but across that, there are about 488 rows of data. Dr. Loeb's office entered 56 of these locations into the national broadband map. They didn't do this randomly. Instead, they picked one or two from each community to try to gain a fair representation of the service in those communities. In Dr. Loeb's survey, 14 of the 56 locations surveyed contained no location data. Does this mean that at a location which you claim you serve, it may not have been entered into the national broadband map?
Or that we don't provide broadband there.
Okay, thank you. If this location is not on the map, then is it correct to say that the location would not be counted as an unserved location by the NTIA?
I don't know that.
Okay. So then, if it's not on the map, if it is not on the map, then it is also correct to say that this location would not be counted as a high cost location by the NTIA?
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. And then, is it also correct to say that the NTIA used unserved locations and high cost unserved locations to allocate BEAD funds among the states?
That's my understanding.
Thank you. Mr. President, I have no more questions for the witness.
All right, Mr. Pollard, thank you.
Mr. President, if it's a convenient time for a break, we'd like to do that. Moment.
Yeah, Mr.
Acceptable.
Pollard, any objection to taking a break at this moment?
No objections to a recess.
All right, how much time would you like, Mr. Scott?
Well, 15 minutes should be appropriate.
Okay, any objection to that, colleagues? All right, the time is now 9:42 AM. Why don't we take an 18-minute break? And we'll return back at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, time is now 9:42 AM. We will go off the record. Thank you. All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, you still on? Oh. Philip, did we lose Commissioner O'Donnell? All right, well, we have a technical difficulty here. We seem to have lost Commissioner O'Donnell, so we'll stay off the record for now.
Mr. President,
Welcome back.
yeah, I pressed the wrong button instead of the unmute button. I pressed the discard button. Sorry.
That's all right. All right, the time is now 10:02 a.m. We will go back on the record where we had left off before we went into recess was that MCC had concluded its initial rounds of questioning of this witness. So, Mr. Scott, I don't know if you watched our proceedings, but generally what happens now is we'll do a round of questioning from commissioners.
I have, and I wasn't sure if that would come before or after redirect, but
Yeah. All right. Commissioners, this is time now for commissioners to ask questions. Vice President Fielder.
I have no questions at this time, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was thinking also that Commissioner opportunity would come when all of the information, all the witnesses have been looked at and cross-examined. But I'll proceed. One of the contentions was that CenturyLink did not find it economically profitable or reasonable, whatever the exact term is, to put fiber into the most affected communities, and that despite the amount of money from the federal government and from the state money, that there still wouldn't be enough. And I'm comparing that to the Nebraska testimony that said that the $15 million was adequate in Nebraska to complete those connections. I'm interested in the opinion of the representative from CenturyLink as to whether or not the legal obligation to serve is subject to whether or not the company will make a profit.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I'm not an attorney. I'll answer the first. Just wanted to make sure that you understood about Valentine, Nebraska. We received $15 million for that one wire center.
Yes.
And we are doing 10 other wire centers now with additional funding from the state. But we have about
In Nebraska?
In Nebraska. And we have
Right.
about 100 wire centers between the two companies. So we're not even 10% of the way done. But the state has provided us funding to do those. And in WEBO, we were suggesting that our initial estimate was it would cost about $7 million for WEBO, and that included the middle mile funding from Glendive to WEBO.
Well, thank you. Clarify with me, if you can, that it seems to me that, I mean, I live in Billings, and there's a CenturyLink operations center nearby me in a very large facility downtown. I see CenturyLink trucks all around, very nice looking white trucks. And it would seem to me that the company has deployed its infrastructure, you know, the maintenance people, to where there is a profitability, and where there is no profitability or less, then the company has ignored people. The testimony of several witnesses that, well, I wouldn't call it testimony because it's not legal, but the information that we've received from several affected people, including the commissioners from WEBO, point out that people have gone without service for 3 weeks at a time. Appointments have been made and then not fulfilled. When somebody was finally able to get through, it just seemed like, despite the legal obligation to serve, not just in terms of the OOS, but just the basic fundamental relationship of CenturyLink to its customers and the obligation to serve, that that the company has just not been responsive. And it seems to me it's been intentional in that the deployment of personnel is based upon profitability, not in terms of legal responsibility. That doesn't strike me as being very responsible. How do you? I understand your acknowledgement. You're not an attorney, but certainly you're very familiar with a lot of the decision making that goes on there, and it just helped me understand why that the disconnect between liability, obligation, and profitability.
So I'll try to explain based on, we can go back to WEBO, the county commissioners that had complained. In all of 2021, we had 12 tickets. And in 2022, we had 19. And so far this year, we've had 1. That is not enough work to have a technician full-time in WEBO. That would be 1 or 2, until this year, it'd be 1 or 2 tickets to work for customers per month. So because our service areas have been hollowed out with competition from cable companies and from mobile wireless and from satellite, we just don't have enough customers to keep a technician busy in every wire center that we have.
Well, let me interrupt you at this point to say I fully understand that. I've understood that for years, that the company cannot replace old equipment with newer equipment because nobody's making it. I also understand this is a problem across the country. Technologies change, and that poses some very real problems. I get that. Nevertheless, it seems that the company has turned a blind eye to obligations to serve. My particular focus is customers' access to 911. Somebody would say, well, if they don't have a phone all the time, it's not a life or death issue. Well, we're talking about very rural areas, and we're talking about 911 connectivity for emergency services. And it would seem to me that nobody can just run down the street and knock on the fire department door or an EMT situation, that there is a very, very real necessity for connectivity. And it just seems to me from the complaints that we've received that the company simply is not responsive. I understand fully what you're saying about it's not enough to have 1 full-time person there, but I said those nice white trucks here in Billings can certainly be capable of driving to WEBO for that area. It just, please help me understand why the financial obligations and personnel limitations seem to preclude fulfilling the responsibility to keep people alive in times of danger.
We take that very seriously and we respond just as quickly as we can. In the cases where it takes several weeks, there are a few of those, and that's normally because something has happened and we would have to rebuild the equipment in that particular location. But those, to my knowledge, are few and far between in Montana. But we do take everyone very seriously. And while I know that 94% of Montana households have a cell phone, the cell phone may not work at their house. So we understand that, and we try to get to repair outages just as quickly as we can. And we sometimes do miss an appointment, and usually that's because the previous appointment that the technician's working on took longer than expected. And so our system that we have now tries to connect with the customer. If they provide their cell phone number to us, we will connect with the customer and let them know that the technician is running late, and that either it'll be later this afternoon or we may have to reschedule to tomorrow. And the customer and the technician then can interact.
Well, thank you. That sounds really good. I would point out that the complaints that all commissioners have received from the affected parties here is not legal testimony. It's not sworn. It's not competently, put together necessarily. But I will say that the complaints that we've received about the responsiveness of CenturyLink to complaint calls is in tremendous dissonance to the standards that you just outlined. It seems to me that from what we've heard is that what you've stated is what I think you said as quickly as possible. Well, when you're talking about a lack of personnel, adequate personnel, then what is possible under the circumstances becomes almost intolerable from a security point of view. But having said that, let me go on to another situation, and that is that when the company CenturyLink asked for the relaxation of the OOS from 24 hours to 3, more days, it seemed to me immediately on the face of it that was a death spiral. Is that if service is inadequate now, that it's a statement by the company that they can't do it, and for all the reasons, and with the market share number of customers continuing to drop, that would, even that standard would not be met. It's the commission's responsibility, as well as other parts of the state, to verify and require that contracts with customers be fulfilled. And the current OOS is one of those contracts that has, in many cases, we've been told, has not been fulfilled. But what concerns me is this. What concerns me is that this trend of decreasing revenue to the company, and therefore decreasing personnel, or the revenue to support the personnel and the equipment, has been going on for some time. I think the representative from MCC pointed out a figure of 10 years. What concerns me is that CenturyLink has not reached out recently to the Public Service Commission saying, you know what, we're having a hard time with this thing. It wasn't until the commission initiated, it seems to me, our concern about this, that the company was responsive. I would consider the company to be more professionally responsible to have proactively come to the commission and said, you know, we're not able to fulfill this, and we need your help. We need something or other. But it wasn't until the commission started paying a lot of attention that the company responded. Am I misguided on that?
Mr. Commissioner, I'd just like to provide a little bit of background. That was the reason that we had the settlement in 2014 is because we couldn't meet the obligate or that service measure then. And the company and all the parties came to an agreement that it would be that we would waive that measure for a period while CAF 2 was being completed. So the company at that time had been working with the commission saying that we can't meet that service measure. In that also, I think during that time, I was not part of that discussion or that docket, but I'm told that CenturyLink also asked that the commission, as part of the settlement, that the commission look at the rules to determine which rules were still applicable within 5 years, or maybe it was within the time of the waiver. I'm sorry. And in 2019, the CenturyLink came to the commission and asked for the rule to be changed. In 2020, CenturyLink approached staff and said, we still can't meet the rule and that we need to extend the waiver. And then in 2021, we applied for a waiver from the commission. And then the commission opened up a new docket to update the rules, and CenturyLink provided comments in that docket. And then during this entire docket, we have been forthright that we don't meet this rule.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the company's cooperation in the 2014 settlement decision. And again, I haven't been around all that period of time and watching this carefully, but you know, from the testimony of, or again, I'm using a legal word, from the complaints by affected people, CenturyLink customers who have enormous problems with their connectivity, that the fact that the company has come forth and saying, well, we can't meet these specific guidelines. I appreciate that. Nevertheless, it seems like that's a statement by the company saying we can't meet them, and in actuality, we're not going to meet them. It seems to me that the company has multiple assets all over the whole state that could be on a rotating basis, perhaps directed to fixing some of the issues in these affected areas. And is these particular customers, are they particularly sequestered from the rest of the company operationally?
I don't know which customers you're speaking of because I haven't seen all the complaints that you're speaking about. But no, we don't sequester any customers from the rest of the company. We try very hard to provide the best service possible to each customer. And we don't all, I mean, we try to be the very best we can every day. Some days we fail, but we try. And our technicians are very good. They receive a large amount of training. But since COVID, we have had a large for us, a large percentage of the technicians had to be replaced. And so we've got newer people. It takes, and just because they're newer doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that it may take them a little longer to repair service. And so they aren't able to get as many customers repaired every day. But they learn, and as they learn, they get better, and they are all very capable and very good technicians.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I understand about the effects of the economy. It would seem to me, and I'd like your opinion, although you are not the director of the company or anything else in that type of a decision-making capacity, it would seem to me, because of the cited federal and state money towards broadband connectivity, and the company's inability or failure to meet the connectivity standards, that it would seem to me, and since CenturyLink is in the fiber business, that it would seem to me to be a reasonable solution to the whole thing, while protecting people's ability, again, as I say, to reach 911. That's the minimum threshold that I see on there, that CenturyLink would be relieved of its responsibility to provide service to these customers as soon as they have some fiber connection, whether that is provided by CenturyLink or by someone else. But my concern is that these people get served. By whom, I don't care. But it would seem to me that a one-time payment to say, we're with you for a year and then you're on your own, that I get very, very nervous about that. So does it seem like an unreasonable solution to you for the company to say, we will replace or be an agent of replacing, or somehow these people with a service that we cannot maintain because it's a legacy system. It can't be maintained. That we'll bring it up to speed, or we'll have somebody else bring it up to speed, and at that point we'll be relieved of our obligation. Does that seem to make sense to you?
I'm not exactly sure where you were headed. As far as the satellite offer, that was at the request. We made that offer at the request of the commission, based on the Wyoming settlement. And I think Mr. Dalton talked to the people in Wyoming, and they didn't get any complaints about that offer that we had made in Wyoming. In terms
and
of,
I understand that offer has been made in other parts of the country as well.
I'm not aware of it, but I don't work on every state, so it's possible.
Surely.
It has been.
Yes. Well, here's my point, is that I would like to have some type of a resolution to this that satisfies the obligations of this commission, of your company, and provides at least a minimal amount of service according to FCC standards to people of Montana who otherwise have no means of connectivity. That's in a nutshell. Do you think that the company is interested in coming to that type of a solution?
CenturyLink has shown its interest. We took CAF. We made multiple bids in RDOF. Most of them we didn't get awarded because we were underbid by other parties. We took part in ARPA, and we've been very active in the BEAD planning that the Montana Broadband Commission is doing right now. We're very hopeful that we'll be able to participate in that. And we've been active on a national level with NTIA. in trying to helping to develop the plans for spending the BEAD funding.
Thank
Does
you,
that answer
Mr.
your
President.
question? I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't, but thank you. Mr. President, that's all I can think of. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell, Vice President Fielder has indicated that he does have a question or two based on testimony that's been provided. Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. Lubick, of the $90 million in CAF2 funding that CenturyLink has received for this area, has all of that been allocated to service for customers?
Yes, it was all allocated, and that 90 million that CenturyLink received was over a six or 7 year period, and it was for building and maintaining a broadband and voice network. And CenturyLink allocated that money and spent it in the areas. We had to spend it only in the areas where the FCC approved it.
Can you just help me understand what the threshold was between the customers that received that and the customers that didn't?
The FCC did a cost allocation method and determined what the cost was for each census block. And census blocks that cost between $52, I'm using round numbers, and $198 per month per customer in that census block were eligible for CAF. If it was below that or above that, it was not eligible.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Regarding the proposed solution that CenturyLink has put forth with the satellite service, has there been a look at other alternatives to that? Like, I know that in the maritime community, VHF radios are used by almost every seagoing vessel, and their 911 is channel 16. They get on channel 16 with an emergency, the Coast Guard picks it up. Has anything like that been looked at for some of these areas, to your knowledge?
I have not heard about anything like that. That could be a great possibility. I'm not sure how each person would get the equipment they would need.
Yeah, they're small radios, really, not very big, but somebody has to monitor. And I'm thinking the local emergency centers may. So none of that was looked at in terms of allocating funding for that type of a program that would be perpetual rather than a one-time, here's your money for a phone and a satellite service for a year.
No, we did not look at something like that. But we were basing it on the Montana settlement or on the Wyoming settlement, which was done in 2019.
Okay, I understand that. Regarding your response, I believe it's in PSC 22. And it seems like you're rebutting Dr. Lube's recommendation, and the paragraph is that Dr. Lube's recommendation incorrectly assumes this commission has the authority to direct broadband deployment or CenturyLink's participation in broadband funding programs. The commission clearly lacks that authority. Do you recall that? Do you need to
Yes,
find it? I don't see a footnote to that or any reference to support that statement. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, broadband is a federal service, and it's regulated to the extent it is regulated by the federal government, by the FCC, as opposed to the state governments and state commissions don't regulate broadband and as such can't require a broadband build out.
Would it be possible for CenturyLink to cooperate with the commission should it seek that kind of a remedy? Is there anything that would preclude CenturyLink from cooperating with the commission if it were
No,
to seek that type of solution?
No, as a matter of, that's what we did with the Nebraska government, with the Nebraska Commission. They offered us funding and we accepted it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
That's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Commissioner Bukacek?
Mr. President, with your indulgence, I'm compelled to apologize to this witness for one commissioner's statements made today that could be construed as impugning motives on your company.
I didn't take it that way, so thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Any questions, Commissioner Bukacek? Okay. Well, Commissioner Panucci has not yet joined us. So it'll be my turn to answer some questions. So I'm going to spend some time with you.
Okay.
I think this is the first time that we've met.
Yes.
I'm James Brown. I'm president of the commission. I appreciate your coming today and providing your testimony.
Glad to do it.
Mr. Lubick, where I'd like to start is picking up on Commissioner O'Donnell's questions, because I think there needs to be some elucidation or clarification.
Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell mentioned 3 times, and I quote, the obligation to serve.
Mhm.
So I would like you to define for the commission whether or not your company has an actual obligation to serve customers in the state of Montana. And we can use Weibo as an example.
I have 7 states that I work on, and I'm trying to remember the rules in Montana. So excuse me for a second. I don't remember in the rules any specific obligation to serve every location, but I could be wrong. I've got too many states that I am working with in terms of a specific obligation. Some states say that we call it carrier of last resort or provider of last resort. Some states have that specifically in the rules and other states don't. And I'm sorry, I don't remember Montana's rules.
And I appreciate that. So would it be your understanding that when you provide service to customers in Montana, you're doing that essentially on a free market basis? In other words, you're offering a service
Mm-hmm.
to the customer in exchange for remuneration, correct?
Yes.
All right. So that'd be true, most likely,
Mhm.
to your understanding in Weibo
Mhm.
County, correct? All right. So, so you're familiar with Montana Administrative Rule 38.53371, paragraph 7, paragraph small b, correct? The MTTR rule. Okay. Also known as the out of service rule, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Can you, in layman's terms, describe to the commission what that rule actually requires?
That rule says that we will repair out of service conditions within 24 hours, 90% of the time, excluding Sunday and other like large natural events.
And so it's my understanding, and see if you agree with me on this, is that once CenturyLink has entered into a contract with the customer to provide a service, then this obligation kicks in at that point in time, correct?
It's not with the customer. That's an obligation that's a rules that the commission has set up. And so that's between us and the commission. It's not in our tariff or in our terms of service with the customer.
But it's based, what I'm asking you is and I appreciate that answer. What I'm asking you is it's based on a voluntary agreement, but
Yes.
our commission rule is based on a voluntary agreement between a customer and your company,
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then in response to Commissioner O'Donnell's questioning, he had averred that your company had not come before the commission to express concerns about your ability to comply with this rule. Do you remember that
Yes.
line of questioning? But I believe the record shows that, in fact, you have come before the commission and filed for a petition of waiver of the administrative rule we were just discussing,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And it's my understanding that you did that based on what you have admitted in testimony is that at this point in time, you're unable to comply with the rule, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so let me back up a little bit then with that line of questioning. So it's my understanding from your testimony, reading your testimony, that, well, let me back up even further. So I think it might be helpful for the public listening to this hearing for you to describe what an anaconda service is.
Oh, okay. An anaconda is a type of copper service that is used for long distance loops. So in Montana, there may be customers who live 30, 40, 50 miles from town. And Anaconda was a service developed in the 60s to provide phone service over those long loops, long copper facilities. And so it does and it still does the best job of any copper facility to provide customers that service, their voice service.
And as I understand it from your testimony, that the Anaconda system, if you will, is becoming more difficult to repair. Could you elucidate on that testimony?
So there's no replacement parts being made anymore. So we repair the parts. We get them off of eBay or wherever we can find them. As we update other, like in Valentine he used Anaconda because we had customers that long ways from town. So we reuse that equipment for other states or other locations that are still using Anaconda.
Okay. So I think you would agree with me in your testimony. You've elucidated several times that it's becoming cost prohibitive for your company to continue to provide customers that are served by Anaconda service, correct?
It's more difficult to provide, to repair the service not just because of the parts, but it's also further away from town. So it takes longer to get to the customers. In addition, the newer technicians may not have been trained on Anaconda, so they haven't done as much. Maybe they've been trained, but they haven't done as many repairs. And so it takes a little longer for them to repair the service. So yes, it's a combination of things that makes it more difficult.
So sitting here today, in theory, it'd be possible for CenturyLink to completely stop providing services to existing Anaconda and go digital customers in Montana, correct?
To completely stop if you mean to just replace the Anaconda service with fiber to the home?
No, that's not my question at
okay.
all. You have,
Okay.
It's my understanding from your testimony that you have no obligation to provide telephone services to folks that are currently using these Anaconda systems, correct?
No, we still have obligations. We have an FCC obligation to provide service to the customers, and the FCC doesn't respond favorably to request to quit providing service in certain areas.
Okay, so this is what I was driving at
Oh, I'm sorry.
in my
Okay.
original questions to you. So describe the FCC obligation.
It's as an ETC, which is we are the provider that originally had the service in each of our areas, and when we were the monopoly provider, and this is a vestige of that. And so we, as an ETC, we are, for the customers that we have, we are supposed to provide service to them. I don't believe that the FCC has they've waived or forborne their service quality measures for the voice obligations as they turn to more broadband obligations.
Okay, so there's been some discussion about the public testimony that's been provided in this matter, and I think you and I are both aware that that's not part of the administrative record in this matter, but I'm going to violate my own rule and aver to some of the comments that have been made in this matter. There is some concern that were we to approve the waiver of the administrative rule at issue here, that there would be nothing then for the commission to in any way prevent CenturyLink from abandoning these customers, if you will. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, CenturyLink can't abandon customers. That's part of the FCC's rules. The only way that there is a filing that we can make where we have no customers on a facility. But that has only been done, we've only done that a handful of times, where we retire the copper because we don't have any customers on it. That's the only thing I can think of that where the FCC would allow us to retire any plant.
Thank you for that answer, because it goes to the very next question I was going to ask you is that has CenturyLink ever explored abandoning the wire centers in Montana where customers are being served by the Anaconda Go digital services, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, we've never discussed abandoning service. No.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you. I'm gonna move now to that portion of your testimony that discusses the proposal that's been filed and sort of the alternatives. You have your testimony in front of you?
Yes, I do.
And by the way, Mr. Scott, have you provided his testimony to our court reporter? Do you have the testimony?
No, not yet, but I will, Mr. President.
All right, please do that if you would. Okay, can you turn to page 27 of your testimony?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you would agree with me that pages 27 and 28 of your testimony are essentially your response to the very direct question of please describe CenturyLink's proposal.
Yes.
That is the beauty of pre-filed testimony, is it not? So one of the proposed terms that CenturyLink has made is to have the commission grant a 6-year waiver of the administrative rule we've been discussing, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then another portion, which is contained on page 27, I believe, of your testimony, is a proposal. It's essentially an offer by CenturyLink of $1,500 to cover 1 year of satellite or wireless service for those existing customers that may want to look at a different provider, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're comparing apples to apples, which may not necessarily be the comparison that I'm going to ask you, but would you agree that the 1 year of service payment that you're offering does not align with the 6-year waiver period contained in the administrative rule? It's not congruent, correct?
I agree with that. Yes.
Can you explain the basis for why you made that decision not to make an apples to apples comparison?
We were basing it on the Wyoming settlement offer was a 2-year agreement, but it only paid for voice. This one pays for both, to the best that we can see in the pricing online from satellite providers. It pays for voice and broadband. To the extent that a customer already has satellite broadband, it'll pay for voice for years. To the extent they have wireless service that they are okay with, then it would pay for years of a wireless. We're not in the Wyoming settlement. We only offered it from one provider because at that time, the satellite provider, HughesNet, agreed to offer a voice-only service. So the customer didn't have to have broadband in order to get voice. The satellite providers won't do that anymore. So we offered to provide voice and broadband funding for a year. But a number of those customers, of our customers, I'm sure already have a broadband provider. And if they can just add voice to it, then this payment will, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 years. It might last that long.
All right, can you turn to, do you have the discovery request in front of you?
Yes,
by any
I do.
chance? Okay, can you turn to MCC 39?
Yes, I have that.
Okay. You would agree with me that MCC 39 essentially asks CenturyLink to provide all work papers and supporting cost analysis used to develop the one-time $1,500 subsidy, correct? Okay. And then you would agree with me that CenturyLink responded there were no work papers or cost analyses associated with that figure, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the obvious question then becomes, how did CenturyLink come up with the $1,500 number?
Yeah, I went to the satellite providers' websites and looked at how much it cost, and I put that in here for each of the providers, and then we estimated the non-recurring cost, because in some cases there's no non-recurring cost. I think that depends on whether you agree to a 2-year agreement. And so if the customer would agree to a 2-year agreement, then they wouldn't have a non-recurring charge. But we put a number in that we thought represented what a customer would pay. And so that's how we came up with the $1,500. It wasn't scientific.
Let me back up just a little bit for foundational purposes. Again, this is a question that's directed more for public consumption. So we've discussed several times the BEAD
Yes.
program. Can you explain what that is?
Oh, yes. The federal government adopted an infrastructure act last year. I believe the timing is I'm not exactly sure on, but part of that was to provide broadband to unserved and underserved locations. And the federal government recognized that this is a nationwide problem. This isn't a problem in Webo. It's not a problem in Montana. It's throughout the entire country. And so they adopted several different programs, but BEAD is the one for broadband in unserved, just in any unserved location. And they adopted $42.5 billion to it. They put NTIA, which is the National, I can't, Telecommunications and Internet Association. I don't remember the agency's name, but they put the NTIA in charge of that and told them to come up with the process to spend the $42.5 billion. NTIA has reached out to the states, and the states each have to come up with a plan. And the Montana Broadband Commission is working on their plan, and they have to present it to the NTIA by the end of this year. And the NTIA has set up $630 million for broadband enhancement in Montana.
And so based on your testimony, you're aware that one of MCC's proposals, I believe, in this matter, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure one of MCC's proposals is to have the commission order CenturyLink to apply for the speed funding, correct?
I believe that's in order to get the waiver. I think that's what they were suggesting.
Okay, so let's talk about the mechanics of that. I know that your company has raised a jurisdictional objection to that request, but setting that aside, can you walk the commission through what the process is for the legislature's, I guess it's a special committee to allocate this funding, how they'll determine who gets the funding and where it will go to, if you know?
Right now, the Broadband Commission is working on that. They have to identify the high cost locations and the extra high cost locations, and then the lower cost locations, and then identify in those, they'll have to identify which areas would be subject to a 25% applicant funding and 75% from the Broadband Commission. In other locations where it's maybe possible to get 100% funding. And then if it's in an extra high cost location, the Broadband Commission can reject any applications and just decide what type of service would be eligible for those locations, the extra high cost locations. And one of their examples that they did for I think it was for their August meeting, showed that, or said that they would, if they chose this example, there would be about 600 locations that would be subject to satellite broadband and voice as the only type of enhancement they would get.
Now, how is it determined what an extra high cost location is?
I'm glad I'm not on that commission. That's what the Broadband Commission is doing right now.
So we don't know, for example, if Weibo would be considered an extra high cost location.
The number that they were looking at when they said 600 would be $151,000 per location. There could be some in Weibo that would be that high, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Can you turn to page 15 of your testimony? Let me know when you're there.
I'm ready.
Well, I think that where we left off with my questioning sort of fits right into your testimony here. So you would agree with me on page 15 of your testimony. You state that, quote, the construction costs for a more current copper network in Weibo would be at least as costly or cost prohibitive as a replacement fiber network, correct?
Correct.
Then turning to page 16 of your testimony, you assert that the cost to build fiber to rural Weibo County would be approximately $185,000 per customer, correct?
Yeah, per existing customer, yes.
Okay. You also assert, assuming 80%, I believe, ARPA state subsidy, CenturyLink would have been required to pay out of pocket over $37,000 per existing customer.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Just a clarification then on that, some of these numbers. When did you calculate the $185,000 and $37,000 figures?
It was when we were looking at different locations we might be able to bid in with the ARPA funding. And we asked the engineer at that time, the planning engineer, to do a special project to calculate what it would be for the Weibo Wire Center.
if you've prepared the numbers or if you know them perhaps off the top of your head, would these figures that we've just discussed be any higher today, to your knowledge?
Yes, they would be higher, but I do want to explain that what the Montana Broadband Commission is looking at cost per location. This is cost per customer or existing customer. There are more locations than customers. And that was, I believe, one of the questions from the consumer advocate. So if we were looking at cost per location, it's likely in the $80,000 to $90,000 range. And yes, costs have gone up since 2021 when we did this original request. I don't have the figures here. I know but I do for Nebraska, and they went up 50% for placement of fiber between 2020 and 2023.
And based on the Nebraska experience, what factors caused the 50% increase?
Both an increase in the cost of fiber and the increase in the cost of the contractors we use. I'm guessing they had to pay their people more to keep them working, but the increase of the cost of contractors to lay the fiber for us.
Okay, appreciate that. So keeping those numbers in mind that we just discussed and then comparing them to the $1,500 per customer figure that's been proposed by CenturyLink. Obvious answer, but you would agree that the $37,000 per customer to build out is higher than the $1,500 per customer that CenturyLink offered in its proposal. So would you agree that it would still then be economical for CenturyLink to offer customers more than $1,500 comparatively to build out? Or is that an unfair comparison?
To build fiber?
What I'm driving at, I think.
Okay,
And
go ahead.
I appreciate your puzzlement at that question because maybe I didn't ask it right. Is the 1,500? I think you would agree with me that the $1,500 proposal would be more economical than a build out.
Yes.
For the company.
Yes,
correct?
it would.
But even so, my question then is that in theory, CenturyLink could offer more than 1,500 and still have it be more economical for the company than to do cost build out. You agree with that?
Well, we would take any feedback. We've never gotten any feedback from our offer. We would take any feedback seriously, but what we were saying is that we wouldn't build fiber absent a 100% broadband grant because it won't even be it won't even be economic to maintain the network once we have it built. Because there are just so few customers per mile, it's just not dense enough to be economic even after it's built.
So I'm going to ask you these questions literally out of your ignorance. Under the BEAD program, is there a 100% option instead of a split option?
There is, but it's up to the state. The state has to apply for that waiver of the 25% and this is my understanding, I've just read through it a couple of times, but the state would have to apply to NTIA for a waiver and the NTIA can accept or reject the waiver request. But the idea is for the areas that are within the high cost that it's potential for a waiver to happen. If it's below the high cost, then no. If it's in that area between high cost and extra high cost, then it would be a potential for a waiver. But the Montana Commission has already said that they're short on funding, and so they're going to be looking at waivers very closely.
So you testified earlier, and again, this is just a curiosity question, but I think it would be helpful to know. You testified earlier that the Anaconda systems, I believe your testimonies were put in essentially the 1960s.
Between the sixties and eighties sometime.
Do you know if those systems were in theory subsidized by the federal government? I mean, I think you would agree with me that like the BEAD program or the ARPA program are essentially a form of government subsidy,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So do you know?
At the time, so some of the copper may have been before the sixties that was in there. If you want to go way back, AT&T originally was before divestiture. AT&T was the ILEC, and in the early 1900s, they agreed to be the ILEC and have the federal carrier of last resort if they didn't have any competition. And so that was the basis for this, although going forward. Then after divestiture, things changed, and then with the 1996 Act, it changed again. But during that time, there was like a three-legged stool of funding that allowed companies like us to build out in rural areas. We had business and consumers in town that paid above cost rates, and that gave us money to build other places. Excuse me.
Let me know if we've been going for a while, so let me
No,
know if you need to take a break.
I'm fine for now. I'll let you know though. Then we also had access costs. So the long distance companies basically rent our network when a long distance call happens, and they pay above, at the time they were paying above cost rates for that. And then the federal government, the FCC, provided funding, and some states also provided funding in a universal service fund. And between those three buckets or three legs of the stool, we were able to provide rural service. The FCC hasn't provided any rural maintenance funding since 2015. And Montana Commission hasn't either. The access rates have been, terminating access has been removed. It's zero. Originating access is still there. So we've decreased by 50% that bucket of rate of dollars that have come in. And then competition has hollowed out a lot of our residential markets in town. We still have a larger business market share, but it's basically collapsed the stool.
And on that thought, I believe you aver in your testimony that, I'm just going to put some words in your mouth, because the stool has collapsed, that the regulatory theory behind Montana Administrative Rule 38.5.33717 has essentially been negated, correct? Because of the concept of competition.
Well, the rule hasn't been negated, but the ability of us to meet the rule has been severely harmed.
I'm just going to ask you this question just flat out. Do you believe that this rule is still necessary in what you aver is a competitive market?
We're going to provide service to our rural customers the best we can, and we're going to continue to provide, and we'll fix service that's out as quickly as we can. Sometimes in extreme situations where we have to repair the equipment, it takes longer. But we're trying to, our processes internal, our technicians are trained to fix things right the first time. And so hopefully that reduces the number of out of service. And I looked in each of the wire centers that were active in this docket. There was Webo and Whitehall and Havre and Lewistown. And then there were a couple others that were brought up, but in each of those, Cascade was one from the last one, and Wolf Creek. In each of those wire centers, we've had fewer trouble tickets and fewer outages than we had in 2013 and 2014. So our technicians are making progress on it. We're not perfect, but we're trying.
Let's move to another area of your proposal.
Okay.
Can you go to page 27 of your testimony?
Yes.
On page 27 of your testimony, I believe you outline the notice to customer process you're proposing, correct?
Yes. We would notify them each 3 times. Yes.
And that does bring up a question. You state on page 27 of your testimony under paragraph 2, I guess you would call it, that there's essentially 600 eligible customers in the state that we're talking about, correct?
Yeah, that was as of last December. It's now a little less than 500.
Okay, and that I think the attorney for MCC asked you this question, but bears repeating, I suppose, is that the 500 number that you're giving is customers throughout the state, just not in the WeBo.
Correct. It's throughout the state. It's anywhere that we have Anaconda service. And we have that in, I believe, about 40 wire centers of our 73.
Okay. So in your proposal, you propose that CenturyLink will send 3 direct notices to each of the eligible customers in the state, correct? Let's kind of work through that a little bit. I think there's some concern perhaps that based on the Wyoming model that there may not be, the notice process may not be effective, but let's talk a little bit about that. All right, so where I'll start with this is, do you have data request PSC 15 in front of you?
15. Yes.
Okay, so go to 15C.
Yes.
All right, in that, in your response to our data request, you state that the eligible customer, 500 we're talking about, will be required to first contact CenturyLink to avail itself of the offer and to place an order to disconnect its CenturyLink service.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And then you state the subsidy, the $1,500 subsidy you're proposing will be processed as soon as the customer has taken both steps, correct?
Correct.
So we're talking 2 steps, correct? That the customer has to take.
Yes.
Is that congruent with the Wyoming proposal? You know?
That was how most customers did the Wyoming proposal, but no, the Wyoming proposal would also allow a customer to keep their voice service if they wanted to.
And is there any reason why you remove that portion of the proposal?
Well, for one, only about 25% of the Wyoming customers actually accepted the offer, but we're looking to help subsidize customers who have fallen out of favor with our service. If you look at Dr. Loeb's testimony, one of his tables said that there were less than 7% of the Anaconda customers that presented out of service or requested out of service tickets be created each year. That means 93% didn't have an out of service problem. It doesn't mean 93% are happy with our service, but it's 93% didn't have an issue. So to the extent someone has an issue with us, with our service, we were willing to subsidize them from a competitive provider. And so we thought that it was reasonable for us to request that they disconnect our service since they weren't happy with our service.
Okay, and we'll get into a little bit about the end of your answer shortly, but
Okay.
let's go back to how many eligible customers of the 500-ish that we're estimating do you expect to accept the $1,500 offer? Have you done that kind of analysis?
We've not gone out and asked people if you had an offer, what would you accept it? I just in my mind, I was thinking in the 50 to 60% range, but I don't really have a good reason for that other than if you look over 6 years at 7% of the customers, assuming none of them were repeats, less than half had an issue of our Anaconda service over 6 years.
It does bring up a question, and this is sort of out of order of where I've been going, but is there a shelf life for the Anaconda system? Have you projected that out? I mean, we're talking 10 years, 20 years?
I'm not an engineer. I couldn't really tell you that one. I know we're not the only ones who have Anaconda in the country. We have it in a number of states. I think the attorney asked me or read off the other states where we have it. And that's one of the things that the federal government is doing with this broadband initiative and funding replacement because they know they understand that there's no economic way to replace these systems.
But we both agree that there is a shelf life, correct?
It hasn't been, the replacement parts haven't been made for a couple of decades and it's still running and it's still working due to our good technicians.
All right. Under your proposal, how would, if an eligible customer opts in, if you will,
Yes,
and accepts your offer, how will they get the $1,500?
so the first thing they would do is contact the satellite company or whatever service they want to have, whether it's fixed wireless, satellite, and if they want to port their number, so keep their number, existing number, they would have to port it to the other provider. So that's why they have to call that provider first and make sure that that provider is willing to port. Then the second thing is they would call CenturyLink and request a disconnect. And we would identify in our system that they are eligible for the subsidy, and then we would send them the check or a gift card or whatever.
Okay, let's clarify that. It
will likely be a gift card. So they can use it for whatever they want.
So really what I understand from your testimony is that the proof, if you will, that would have to be provided by the customer would be the porting of the number?
No, the proof is just that they disconnected our service.
Okay, thank you.
If they don't need a port, then all they have to do is just call and disconnect.
You think that, and this is spitballing, is there any reason to believe that an eligible customer would be more likely to accept the offer of CenturyLink to send some kind of bill credit?
I hadn't considered that. I mean, but that doesn't really change anything. That doesn't help them if they're dissatisfied with our service other than getting free service.
Do you have any concern? Maybe that's an unfair way to put it, but in your experience, would you agree or would you have any concern that the more steps that's required for a customer to take advantage of an offer, the less likely it is for the customer to take the offer?
Possibly. In this case, we're asking the customer to call us one time and request a disconnect. They would call us if they had a trouble ticket. They would call us if they had a billing issue. So we're just asking them to call us and disconnect service.
I think, now I'm going to characterize the MCC's position here, but I think one of the concern of the MCC on behalf of the customer is that for those customers those eligible customers who do not redeem the offer. And with that in mind, in the scenario were the commission to waive the service rule, that particular set of customers would be no better off than they are today. And in theory, could be worse off, correct? So what I'm saying, if you understand, is the existing customers, if they stay with you,
They would still have service, and we would still maintain the service. They wouldn't get the $1,500, but they would still have voice service from us.
but you would agree they would be getting service with the service rule waived.
They would still be getting service from us, whether it's waived or not. They'll still get service from us. And like I said, 75% of the Wyoming customers didn't take the offer, so they were satisfied with the service we provided.
So on the Wyoming offer, have you done any kind of analysis? When was that offer done?
It was late winter of 2019, and we offered it for the full 2 years, and the customers could take it and get a 2 year 2 years regardless of when they started.
Has there been any analysis done? How many customers have since dropped off that didn't take the offer?
I have not seen anything like that. I don't think we've done that analysis.
Okay, so let's go to PSC 17.
Yes, sir.
All right. In the response to PSC data request PSC 17, you state 15 customers out of 100 accepted the offer in Wyoming, in Lusk, Wyoming, correct?
Oh, yes, in Lusk. Yeah, we offered it in 2 locations.
Offered in 2?
2 wire centers, yes.
So it'd be
Lusk and Wheatland.
Okay. And then in Wheatland, which you just mentioned, 8 out of the 38 possible accepted the offer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in that same data response, I believe you assert the amount of offers accepted, quote, indicates that CenturyLink services were acceptable for the majority of eligible customers served by the Anaconda system, correct?
Yes.
So in formulating that response, did your company do an analysis of why customers may not have accepted the offer in Wyoming?
We did not do a response like that. Just in my opinion, just like in Montana, not everybody complained. Not everybody had an issue, and not everybody needed broadband. And so they were satisfied with having voice, and they were satisfied with the service we provided.
Appreciate that answer. So back to sort of the subset of questions I was asking you about awareness by the customer of the deal, if you will. Yeah. Is it a possibility in Wyoming that the low acceptance rate, that customers didn't have the information to even know that the proposal was pending? Do you have any concerns about that arising in this case?
No, I don't think in that case it was. We did, I believe we did 2 customer meetings in Lusk and 2 public meetings in Lusk and 2 in Wheatland. And we put it in the newspaper in each location. I believe at least in one of the two wire centers, we did a satellite. We showed them, we set up a satellite service and showed them how they could get broadband, how fast it was. And we made phone calls over it also. So they had several opportunities in addition to getting a letter from us. But in this case, since it's 40 wire centers, it wasn't as easy to identify how we could do it. I'm up for suggestions if you have some.
Yes, of course. Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to ask a clarification on that
Yes.
point. In Wyoming, the customers were able to get this subsidy for an alternate system and keep their CenturyLink system, correct?
Yes, but the subsidy in Wyoming was $25 a month. And they had to show that they had voice service from the satellite provider from HughesNet.
Thank you for the clarification.
So we got a list each month from HughesNet of how many customers they had.
Do you have any concerns that maybe the low acceptance rate, if I could call it that, was because the acceptance process was burdensome?
I don't think so. In order to buy something, you have to recognize that you need it, and then you have to make a decision to do it and follow the steps that any provider offers.
Okay, I believe Commissioner O'Donnell may have asked you this question, but maybe it was counsel for MCC, but there are other states, as I understand, in which public service commissions or utility commissions are also investigating concerns about CenturyLink's legacy copper infrastructure, correct?
Yes.
You may have identified the states. Could you walk through that again?
I don't think we have before. Minnesota is one of my states, and they're doing an investigation right now. There was one in Oregon that I think I saw last week that it's settled. I'm not positive about that, but they settled our pricing plan, and I thought that I didn't ask, but I thought that the pricing plan and the service quality were the same. They had combined it. Nebraska has a service quality investigation open for us and Windstream and Frontier, but there was a hearing and an open hearing on it last October, and there's been no action since then. Those are the only ones I'm aware of.
You may not know this based on your testimony, but in the Oregon case, was there a resolution that was similar to the $1,500 proposal here?
I'm not aware of that, no. I don't think we offered that there.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the effect of the waiver of the service rule if the commission grants it.
Okay.
Can you turn to page 8 of Dr. Loeb's testimony?
You're making me dig down clear to the bottom here. So here, no, that's the affidavit. Yes, this is it.
All right, can you turn to page 8?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Go to lines 4 through 8 on his testimony, if you would.
Okay.
I think you would agree with me that Dr. Loeb asserts that, quote, by waiving the OOS rule requirement, the proposal would reduce the service quality protection related to repairing outages within 24 hours for all but a maximum of 600 customers. And he goes on to say, this means approximately 64,218 access lines would be impacted by the reduction in protection. Do you agree with that statement or analysis?
You said that was on page 8. Did I get the wrong? Maybe I was on the wrong page.
Yes, I believe it's on page 8.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, I see it. I think the way it printed out, it was on page 9 of mine.
Okay, very good. Well, do you see the testimony I'm referring to?
I
The header should be stated what is wrong with the CenturyLink propole.
I don't see that. I mean, I must be in the wrong spot. So,
Mr. Scott, do you want
I
to?
have that.
Yeah, do you want to help him?
Mr. President, I just asked the witness to review it if he has any confidentiality concerns. I don't have my redacted version. I just want to make sure he's comfortable.
Very good.
okay, so I understand now in reading it. And your question was, do I agree with this?
Yes.
Well, just as it was when it was waived in 2014, where we were building 33,000 lines of broadband, that would have left 90,000 or 100,000 lines without or with no benefit and not subject to this line. So I think we're asking for the same similar ways of doing things this time, is that to provide a response based on what was requested. This was our offer. And while 64,000 lines, which is all of our access lines at the time, would not be subject to this rule because it was waived, it's been waived for the better part of the last 10 years. And it's not going to change the way that CenturyLink provides service or repairs service. So I don't agree that it would impact these customers in any way.
Have you done any kind of analysis as to your company's service responses during the 6-year period where the waiver was in effect? And what I'm driving at is there any metric that we can look at to see whether the number of complaints or the number of repairs improved?
We can look at either total out of service numbers or trouble tickets per 100 customers, because to me, that's a better example of whether our network is performing. It's a better indicator. And in both those, the number of outages or the number of trouble tickets went down in virtually every wire center.
during the 6-year
during the
period.
6-year period. And our out of service 24 did improve for a while. And then it stagnated or got a little worse over time. But for the first 3 or 4 years, and then COVID hit, and once COVID hit, we had issues with that.
All right. I want to talk a little more about your proposal and how it work in principle. Can you turn to PSC 15 sub E?
Sorry. Yes, I have it. Sorry.
Okay. You would agree with me that this data request essentially discusses the scenario concerning customers who accept the offer, but then may try to seek to reconnect with CenturyLink, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In the last sentence of your response to this data request, you state that, quote, if such facilities are not available, the customer would follow the line extension terms in the tariff to connect to CenturyLink's QC services, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So based on this question, first, I presume the company has thought about the scenario where the customer may see the $1,500 offer as a great offer, take it, and then try to come back to the company, correct? So essentially the proposal that you have made to the commission would try to address that scenario, correct? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
All right. But even so, you stated that, quote, if such facilities are not available, in what, can you think of circumstances of why the facilities would no longer be available to the customer that disconnected and then sought to reconnect?
Yes. Some of these Anaconda services are for summer cabins, or what I would expect were summer cabins. I believe when I looked at the difference between December of last year and August of this year, we had 3 or 4 new customers in, I believe it was St. Mary. I'm assuming those are summer cabins, and they disconnect service in the winter and reconnected in the summer. So if somebody took advantage of our service, of our offer, and then next summer wanted to get service back from us, someone else may have already taken, if we only have a limited number of these Anaconda lines out there, and if enough people took them, then there wouldn't be one left. And I don't expect that to happen often, but it's possible.
Have you done any kind of analysis on what the average cost someone who took the offer would face to try to reconnect based on line extension terms?
That would be unique to each customer. Some of our customers I see in other states, it's somewhere between $500 and $1,500. For others, it's $20,000.
So based on your testimony, a number of the customers we're talking about here are customers that have homes or businesses in remote locations of Montana, correct?
I would guess it's mostly homes. It's possible, but from us, they wouldn't be able to get internet. So I doubt that there's too many businesses.
Okay, I'm gonna have you turn to CTL, data request CTL -002. And just for the witnesses' knowledge and for council's knowledge, I think what we'll do is we'll just go straight, bump up right to the noon hour and then take a lunch break and then just pick up with where we are unless,
Sounds good,
Council
Mr.
Jim.
President.
Perfect. Thank you.
okay. All right, you're doing okay?
Yep.
All right,
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. President, could you repeat which data request we're looking at?
absolutely. CTL -002. You're there?
Okay.
Okay. In response to the status request, MCC responded that it is okay with alternative services if they're available, correct?
Yes.
All right, can you then describe for the commission how CenturyLink will ensure that the alternative services will provide the eligible customers with reliable services?
Sorry, could you ask that again, please?
Sure, of course. So alternative services.
Yes.
So can you describe for the commission how it will ensure the alternative services will ensure that the eligible customers will still receive reliable services?
That was not part of our proposal. As I look at, most of these customers would be satellite based. And this is primarily for voice service. And the satellite providers were deemed reliable for the RDOF auction and for the CAF2 auctions by the FCC. So we would be offering to subsidize service for their, what the FCC considered a reliable option. I'm not sure about fixed wireless. If they were going to a fixed wireless, I don't know how to identify whether, but there are many customers of fixed wireless companies, so I don't want to degrade their service offerings.
So what I'm hearing from you is that for those that may have concerns about getting a reliable service as an alternative, should they accept the proposal, essentially the FCC determines what constitutes reliability, correct? No,
I'm saying that the FCC determined these satellite providers to be reliable, and because they allowed them in the auction. They don't have any regulatory authority over them as far as I know.
Is there any metric that we can look at as a commission as to define what the term reliable is?
I'm not aware of any.
All right, thank you. Can you, sorry to make you jump all over the place here, but can you turn to Exhibit C1 that you provided in your testimony?
I don't think I have that one. You,
Mr. President, it's Exhibit C to his testimony. Is that what you said?
C1, yes.
What you're referring to, Mr. President?
Yes, it is.
yes, sir.
Right, you're on Exhibit C1.
Yes.
And this exhibit describes competitors in each of the CenturyLink's wire centers, correct?
Yes, it does.
So this goes back to the reliability questions
Yes.
that I've been posing. Have you either analyzed or is there direction for the commission to analyze whether the competitors that are described in that exhibit will be able to provide reliable service to all areas in the identified wire centers.
This would not be able to show you that. The best that I can think of is the FCC's new broadband map and the data that Dr. Lube had been using. That's the most recent, and it identifies the number of locations that provide service. It doesn't give an indication of whether anybody has determined that it's reliable. And NTIA said reliable based on being able to provide 100 megabits per second over 20 mega download and 20 megabits per second up speed. And be able to satisfy speed testing to do that. That is what the FCC was considering reliable. It was related to broadband, not to voice service.
So based on that testimony, it's my understanding then that it would be difficult for the commission to make a determination of whether or not an alternative or a competitor service, which you've detailed there in Exhibit C1, would be able to provide, quote, reliable service.
It would, reliable is in the eye of the customer, and each customer may have a different understanding of what they consider reliable.
I appreciate that answer. Let's move to ancillary customer concerns. If you know, what is the average amount of years that the 500 or so eligible customers that we're talking about here have been CenturyLink customers, if you know?
I did never look at that.
Are you aware of situations where a customer might need a landline service for a health reason?
A couple of decades ago, that was the case, either for landline or for, say, a security system at their house. Most security systems have gone to wireless, and when I looked based on a question Dr. Loeb asked, I looked up some information on, say, heart monitoring services, and they all seem to be done over either wireless or internet applications. And to the extent a customer has satellite broadband service, they could send that information over the application to the provider. But yes, we don't offer those services, so they just work over our service or they don't.
Okay, so let's talk about what you're actually offering then with your service.
Okay.
So essentially the concept, which is where we started this entire line of questioning, is that an eligible customer pays CenturyLink to receive telephone service 24/7, correct?
Yes.
So I appreciate that your client has taken or you as a representative have taken the position that you're not meeting the service rule at this point in time. But I think you would certainly agree that when a customer experiences an outage, as was being averred to by Commissioner O'Donnell, the customer is not receiving the full service for which they pay, correct?
Correct.
Is it possible in any way for CenturyLink to calculate or monetize the value of the service lost over a period of time?
So for each customer who calls in with a trouble ticket or an outage ticket, we provide a credit for the portion of the month that the customer's out of service.
Could you explain if you can, like how the mechanics of that work is done, like by like an hourly basis or?
No, it's per day, per 24-hour period. So if they're out of service for 5 days, we would give them 5 days worth of out of 30 for a credit. And if we miss an appointment for some reason, we give the customer a $10 credit for that, or we can't. We normally do give them a credit for that as well.
Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about the BEAD program. And we may have covered some of this ground, but can you turn to your response to data request PSC 22, please?
Yes, sir.
In your response to PSC 22, you state that you expect the Montana Broadband Commission to begin accepting applications for support under the BEAD program beginning in the third quarter of 2024.
Yes.
And then you would expect that the actual funding for the approved projects would begin in the fourth quarter of 2024, correct?
Yeah, yes, that's what the Broadband Commission is expecting.
Have you heard anything differently since the time you provided
No,
that data
I'm
response?
not.
And you may not be able to answer that, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Do you expect that CenturyLink will submit an application for projects under the BEAD program? And if that's confidential, you can certainly.
Oh, we're excited to be to be eligible, and but it all depends on what the final rules are. If the Broadband Commission says that the only way that you can make a broadband grant application is if you agree to pay 25% or more, then that will severely limit what we can do. But to the extent that and we haven't we have not seen that the Broadband Commission is going to do that. I just gave an example. But we've been working with the Broadband Commission, and we're excited to be able to be eligible to apply, and I think that we'll look very seriously at applications. I don't know how many we'll submit, but we submitted 11 last time.
And then I think based on your earlier testimony, you would anticipate that CenturyLink then would apply for the NTI waiver of the 75-25 match.
Where we're eligible to do so, yes.
And I think based on your testimony, that again, this is for my own clarification. The application would go to NTIA, not Connect Montana.
Now, our applications would go to the Montana Broadband Commission. If they determine that they want to ask for a waiver, they would go to NTIA to request it.
Do you know if there's an application due date for the waiver?
I have no idea.
And then I think the answer to this is obvious, but I'm going to ask it for the record anyway. I think you would agree that it's less expensive to maintain a fiber network than it is an Anaconda-based network or a Go Digital system, correct?
Yeah, any new network would be less, would tend to be less, although fiber networks can be more expensive to fix if somebody cuts them. Because the equipment is very expensive to fix fiber cuts. Where in a copper cut, primarily it's just a technician doing the work. For fiber, you have to meld the fiber strands back together.
That was an informative answer, actually. So thank you for that. I'm going to follow up on questions that was asked by MCC's counsel, just so I understand what your response was. But on page 16 of your testimony, you state that CenturyLink would have applied for ARPA funding to upgrade the Weibo Rate Center if it could have been awarded funding for 100% of the cost of the build out, correct?
We were awarded 100% of the cost that we requested. We made an error. We messed up the application. We had a fiber lease between Weibo and Bismarck, North Dakota, that we thought we could use that would reduce the amount of cost to the Montana Commission so that their grants would go further. That fiber lease had gone past its due date, and the companies had turned over, and we were not able to get the lease back. So otherwise we would have had to build from Glendive to Weibo, and we didn't have the cost of that in our application. But that Weibo grant would have only covered in town. It did not cover any locations outside the city.
Well, let's talk about reliability. And I'm coming to the end of my questions here, so thank you for your time. Just again, another question about the mechanics of how all this works. Does equipment on a fiber-based network fail less often than equipment on a copper-based Anaconda system or Go Digital system? Do you know that?
I don't know for sure. I'm not in that group. Just thinking a new system, fiber system would be new. So it likely would fail less. But we have issues all over the country with our fiber network. A rancher digs a post hole and cuts our fiber, or if we, in some locations, we're burying the fiber on the underneath the county road. And as the county grades the road, sometimes our fiber comes up and gets cut. So, but if you're looking for a general answer, yes, it would be less than the maintenance would be less often on a fiber route than a copper route.
You testified earlier that it's difficult for CenturyLink to find replacement parts for the Anaconda and Go Digital systems. Where do you find them?
I know we used to find a lot of them on eBay, but right now we're using other locations where we have where we've put fiber in and we don't need the Anaconda anymore, the equipment. The copper is still there. It's the copper loop is still there, but the equipment that makes the loop work is what we have the shortage of.
And then final question, which sort of sums up some of the conversation we had. What would be the plan for CenturyLink moving forward once the Anaconda or Go Digital systems become unworkable?
Again, that's an issue way bigger than CenturyLink. It's a national issue. And that's what the funding for BEAD is related to. And that's what the Broadband Commission in Montana, one of the objectives of the NTIA is for all unserved locations to get broadband. And so that's what the Montana Broadband Commission has to assert that. They have to tell the NTIA that were able to get broadband to all the unserved locations. That would include those in Weibo, whether it's CenturyLink providing it or someone else.
Well, the time is now 11:54 a.m. So thank you so much for indulging my questions. I think what we do have some commissioners that have indicated to me that based on now the responses that you provided to my question, they have additional follow-up questions. So I think what we'll do with council's consent, I think we'll just break now, do an hour and 5-minute lunch and then come back and then just pick up with this witness. Is there any objection to that?
No objection, Mr. President.
No objection.
Okay. So we'll pick up with you when we return. The time is now So we'll temporarily excuse you as a witness. The time is now 11:55 a.m. and we will go off the record and reconvene at 1 p.m.